Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a new week of broadcasting here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today, we're getting towards the end of September. Today is Monday. It is the 25th day of September in the year 2017. It is a pleasure to be with you on this Monday. As you know, we missed a couple of programs last week. We were together on Wednesday, and here we are again today. And I must let you know that we will not be doing a live program tomorrow. I was just telling Bob, I have to be in Richmond, Virginia tomorrow by noon for a luncheon meeting. And my wife and I are going to make a day of it, but it's not a pleasant trip necessarily. While we're there, we're going to bring our income taxes for 2016. We got an extension, and they have to be filed by the 15th of October. So we have 2 weeks to get them done. So while we were in Richmond, since the CPA that I've been using for 30 some odd years is in Richmond, we thought that we would make tomorrow our target and we would hand deliver the taxes. And so I sent him a note on Friday that I would be there on Tuesday and I would be bringing our tax information by the office and leaving it with him. And I spent the entire weekend working on my taxes as well as grading papers. So it's been a very pleasant weekend. But in between, I was trying to catch some of the gist of some of the major things that were happening, and of course they continue to happen. So I wanted to deal with a number of those issues today here at the Virtual Center. First of all, however, I'd like to encourage you to contact us, and you can do that by sending me an email. And if you trust me, and I would be very glad to put you on the air or put your ideas on the air if you trust me to do that for you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And as we announced last Wednesday, and I almost forgot this, I think if you were here with us Wednesday, you know that the phone that we were using is no longer in service. And now if you would like to get on the air live, you can do it through Bob Kincaid's Skype. And if you go through the Skype number, Bob can get you on the air that way. He's in the studio today, and he'll be glad to get you on the air that way. And then, of course, I mentioned our Facebook page. I have to be honest with you, since I've been doing so much grading and things, in taxes, of course. I've been rather deficient in posting new things on our Facebook page other than materials for the class I'm teaching. But one of the ironies of this, maybe it's not an irony. Maybe calling it an irony is my error. Maybe it's not. It's to be expected and not an irony at all. But most of what I've been posting on our Facebook page over the last 3-4 weeks has been related to the course I'm teaching, and I'm using our Facebook page as a way to communicate with students in the class. And I consistently tell them on a regular basis to check the Facebook page because I'm posting materials there, documents, study questions, any announcements that I might want to get to the students quickly. So I've kind of encouraged them to check the Facebook page fairly regularly. And I've been putting a number of course-related materials on our Facebook page of late. And I mentioned to the class that, so they wouldn't get confused, that everything that I'm intending for them, I'm introducing by saying History 152, WVU Tech, history class materials. And that way they'll know that these materials are there specifically for them. But the irony that I was talking about, which really may not be an irony at all, at all, is that so many of the people that regularly follow this program have gotten into the course. I've received a number of messages and emails and comments on the Facebook page from people who have gotten really interested in some of the course materials that I've posted there. So far, it's been pretty much related to colonial history, to the early American history period. The first exam, the midterm exam, which I gave a week ago today, took them through independence, through the Declaration of Independence. And I want to talk a little bit about that today because those are the exams that I spent the better part of last week grading. I finished them this weekend. The pressure was on. I had to finish the papers so I could get to my taxes. And lo and behold, I was able to do both. I don't know how I did it, but I did. So this morning, with a kind of a sheepish grin on my face, I showed up at class at 8 o'clock this morning with 83 papers under my arm, so to speak, and spent the class this morning going over returning the grades and going over. It's really interesting. Let me give you just one interesting thing that I hadn't even thought about as being a problem until last week. Last week was the first time that I returned a set of papers. I had given them a take-home document on the John Winthrop document on liberty, which I think we talked about on this program as a result. And I had given them that assignment and a couple of weeks ago, and it was I returned it the first of this week. So last week or so, I was grading those papers. No sooner than I get finished with those than we had a midterm exam this past Monday. And it took me until this morning to get those done. And so I'm planning to not give them an assignment for a couple of weeks in order to give my peepers a little bit of a rest because I don't have the strongest eyes in the world anyway, and I've been doing a lot of reading. But the most interesting thing is that as I've been posting materials on our Facebook page, a number of people, regular supporters and listeners here at the Virtual Center, have been reacting to some of the course materials that I put on the Facebook page. Not only that, but some of the friends that I have on the Facebook page not related to this. I have colleagues and former students of mine around the country, basically, who continue to follow the things that are on our Facebook page, even if they aren't regular listeners to the Virtual Center. If they're working during the day, they usually don't. And so they become very interested in what's on the Facebook page, and they look at it periodically. And I've heard from a couple of former students of mine. I have one person who taught history for a number of years and retired last year, I believe, made a comment and said she remembered seeing some of these things from 40 years ago, and she's familiar with a lot of it because she's been teaching it herself for a number of years. And, of course, I had to respond and say, I hope that in 40-some-odd years I've updated the materials a little bit. I hope I've at least had a few new ideas or new ways of looking at things over the last 40 years, and that I'm not doing exactly the same thing I did when she was a freshman in my history class. And I kind of know that that's true. I know I've kept up with her. I know her quite well. She, in fact, went to graduate school at Ohio State and ended up marrying one of the professors there, who's Alan Millett, who's one of the nation's foremost military historians. We became pretty good friends in spite of that, in spite of the fact that he's a military historian, and I'm about as military as one can get, if you know what I mean. But we got along pretty well, and I think the fact that we both crazy about his wife is probably the thing we most had in common. I remember her as a student quite well, and she was one of the better students I ever had, and I won't forget her quickly at all. And that she stayed in touch with me as they've traveled around the world, actually, because Alan speaks overseas and has done a lot with the Korean War. He's written a history of the Korean War, and they go over there for celebrations and book signings and all of those things. So I know he and his wife have been traveling around the world for a number of years since they've been married, and they have, of course, they have a daughter, I believe. I think they have one daughter between them, and so anyway, we've become very good friends. But Martha and I, his wife, have continued to stay in touch on Facebook, and I know when I put a photograph of my wife had done work at our house here and had painted the front door and put flowers out in the front stoop and all of that. And I put a picture of that on Facebook several months ago, I guess now, it's probably this spring. And Martha sent me a comment and said that it had been too long since she's seen this house. You know, it brought back memories because it's probably been 18, 20 years since she and Alan were by. But even though we haven't seen each other for a long time, we still stay in pretty good touch. But anyway, she sent me a very nice message about some of the materials that I've been putting on the Facebook page. Before we get into any of that, I'd like to just offer a thought or two on some of the other issues that are happening in and around us. And one of the issues that I've been following very closely, understandably, I think all of us have, is the pending efforts of Republicans in the Senate to get a replace for the Affordable Care Act passed. And last week, as the legislation co-sponsored by Lindsey Graham and Senator, I think it's Chris, I can't remember his name, from Louisiana, the co-sponsor. But anyway, it looks like the bill's not going to pass, so it doesn't matter. You know, that's one reason I wanted to mention it. I hope I'm not jumping the gun here, but I think when John McCain came out against it at the end of last week, that pretty well put the kiss of death on that. And since that time, a number of senators have said that they probably won't vote for it either. One of them is Susan Collins, of course, and along with Rand Paul and John McCain, that would be the three that would kill the bill. Also, Ted Cruz, interestingly enough, has said that he would have serious problems supporting it. And over the last couple of days, from what I understand, a number of other Republicans have come forward and said they would have difficulty voting for this bill also. I think one of the most interesting comments I heard last week was from Senator Grassley of Iowa, who made the point that the reason he would vote for the bill is because for so long Republicans have been promising people that they were going to repeal and replace Obamacare. For 7 years they've been saying that. And this legislation, if this is the best we got, as he said, we promised them something and we're giving them something, so I have a responsibility to vote for that something. But then he admitted that he could probably find 10 reasons to not support this legislation. In other words, the legislation is lousy, but on the other hand, I'll vote for it anyway because at least we'll have done something that we been promising the voters for so long. It seems to me that when you're playing with people's health care and such a major portion of our economy, I believe it's 1/6 of our economy is connected to health care, that doesn't seem to me to be a legitimate reason for voting for or against anything. The fact that you promised you'd do it, so you do it, whatever it is. That almost sounds like the president himself, because one of the things that we've been able to see over the last 8 months of his presidency is that oftentimes the president is endorsing or opposing issues, policies, and programs based on the political realities of the situation rather than the substance or the content of what it is he's talking about. In other words, he's called up and encouraged members of the Senate and House also to support or oppose particular pieces of legislation when it's very clear he doesn't know the details of that legislation himself. But he's obviously a person that puts a premium on winning. And in order to get a victory, whatever it might be, he'll support things that he knows nothing about. And the first thing that struck me is when I was reading about Senator Grassley's comments on this alternative health care bill, I was thinking the same thing. This almost sounds like the president, not Senator Grassley, who's had a pretty storied career in the United States Senate. He's been there for a long time. He's one of the more respected members of the body. And it's extremely disappointing for me. I don't care what party he's in. It's not the issue. It's just the idea that it's disappointing for me to hear him talk like this and say these things at this point in his career. The legislation, I may have talked about it a little bit last Wednesday, the last time we got together here at the Virtual Center, but the dominant feature of the legislation was to divert significant dollars from federal health care program to the states in block grants. And Lindsey Graham's rationale for this was that this is the first piece of legislation that would really institute federalism into our healthcare system. In other words, it would put the decision making as well as access to the money at the local level, at the state level, and his feeling is that's where it belongs anyway, not at the national level, to be distributed and determined by people who know nothing about the individual needs of various agents and groups of people in this country. And of course, Lindsey Graham's argument is your own governor and legislature would much better know the health needs of the people in your state than would some group of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. And of course, in the abstract, in a vacuum, that makes some sense. That rationale makes some sense. But the minute you put some meat on those bones and the minute you put it into historical context, you begin to realize that since the Civil War and the passage of the so-called Civil War Amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, up until that point in time, most of the more conservative aspects in the country and programs in the country were being activated at the state and local level. And it was the national government with legislation like this, which abolished slavery and was directly involved in Reconstruction at the end of the Civil War, reconstituting the Union after the war was over. It was the federal government that moved in and began to actively support the civil rights of ex-slaves, of non-white Americans. And so ever since that time, it's been the national government that has protected the individual rights of citizens much more than state governments. As we know, many of the state governments, states that had been slave states, began in the late 19th century to actively endorse and support segregationist policies. They were torn or driven to support the famous Plessy versus Ferguson decision, the railroad case on separate but equal, in this case, railroad car accommodations for blacks and whites. In other words, as long as the facilities were equal, you could separate them by race. And that was the ruling of the Supreme Court in 1896 in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson. And the alternative to that, which gets us into the early 20th century in the progressive era, was the extent to which, under the heading of progressivism, the federal government began to move in and undo a lot of these things. So the fact of the matter is, in a historical context, it's been the federal government for the better part of the last century that has been the protector of individual liberties and civil rights in this country. And so one has to think about that. And you can go into the 1970s with the elections of Richard Nixon and Nixon's so-called Southern strategy, where in essence Republicans were able to use race against pro-segregation Democrats, conservative Democrats, as a way to institute the Republican Party as the dominant party in Southern politics. It was the one that was actively supporting states' rights. And at that time, it was the Democrats, the liberals and progressives, that were pushing the national government in directions that many conservatives believe are infringing on the individual liberties and rights of citizens. And so that's been the political context of this debate ever since. So while Lindsey Graham's proposed legislation on health care under the heading of federalism would seem to be quite consistent with the intent of the founders, the fact of the matter is, if you put the emphasis on the health care of individual citizens and access to it, then it's been the federal government, not the state governments, that have been most active in support of citizen health care rights as long as other rights in the areas of civil rights and civil liberties. In effect, by turning over the healthcare system to the states, most of them now under the control of conservative Republican legislatures and governors, then it seems to me that you're putting our healthcare program in the hands of the people that are least likely to support it or endorse it or expand it or actively pursue the successful implementation of it. You're turning over healthcare to the very people you don't want to be able to touch healthcare in this country. Just like in some of President Trump's cabinet nominations, he's put people in charge of federal agencies that don't believe in these agencies. I'm thinking of Scott Pruitt, for example, in EPA, and a number of others, Zinke in the Interior Department, and a number of other things. These people have been active opponents of these federal programs until President Trump got elected, and now the president has put them in charge of some of these major agents, federal agencies. Betsy DeVos in education, for example, who has been a major supporter financially and politically of charter schools. And now she's in charge of federal education policy. It's frightening because traditionally in history, that's the way you deactivate an aggressive federal government, is you appoint people to head the agencies who are opposed to what that agency does. And that seems to be, in a lot of ways, what this proposed replacement for the Affordable Care Act would have done. But now with the opposition that surfaced, we have two firm no votes in John McCain and Rand Paul. And we have a number of tentative no's, and all we need is one more no, from Susan Collins, Ted Cruz, Lisa Murkowski in Alaska is doubtful since she voted against the last one. So it appears that this particular piece of legislation may be all but dead. I think probably the best example that might indeed be true is the activities this weekend, the behavior of the president himself. Of course, the biggest news issue over the last 48 hours or so has been the president's statement about Colin Kaepernick and some of the others who are kneeling during the national anthem at football games. And he has attacked the NFL. He's attacked the commissioner. He's referred to players who are protesting during the national anthem as sons of bees. And, which to me anyway, is totally inappropriate coming out of the mouth of the president of the United States. I mean, to have statements like that, absolutely, absolutely not only uncalled for, but extremely inappropriate. And it seems to me what is disappearing are the last vestiges of civility in our dialogue. I'm really afraid of that, and I think you can see it. In fact, in my class, one of the things that has come out in the discussions is that things that nobody would ever say before, President Trump seems to be giving license to. He seems to be, by examples, telling American citizens that it's okay to say what you feel, even if it's traditionally been considered inappropriate. What that does to our ability to negotiate dialogue and work toward compromise, it's absolutely lethal. Basically, what it does is make dialogue, real dialogue, virtually impossible. And that's unfortunately what we see happening. So this particular piece of healthcare legislation appears like it might be dead. And I think the president's position over this last couple of days on standing and in honor of the national anthem can be seen. I don't know that this is actually all of it, but can be seen as yet one more effort to divert attention from a political failure by taking people's attention away from the health care issue now that it looks like the Republican alternative to the Affordable Care Act is going to go down the tubes again. The president's strategy traditionally, when bad news was coming, was to shift the emphasis, to create some sort of diversionary initiative which would draw public attention away from the failure. And the fact that this particular issue with the NFL and the NBA, by the way, because he attacked Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors and disinvited them from visiting the White House, as championship teams have been wont to do over the last several years. These kinds of behavior things have been getting all the media attention. They've been basically dominating the airwaves throughout most of the weekend, and were this morning as well. The lead story, the lead item on the national news on CBS this morning was a video of President Trump making his speech in Alabama last week, in which he basically referred to these NFL protesters as SOBs. And so clearly, the president has once again successfully hijacked public opinion and the media and driven them away from the issues he doesn't want emphasized by creating new ones which will get their attention and become front page headline stuff. And it appears that that's what's happened. The number of debates and discussions that I've heard in recent days over this issue of protest is phenomenal. This morning on ESPN, as I was getting ready for class this morning early, that was the issue they were talking about. Imagine on a Monday morning after a full slate of NFL football, enough to keep these people busy talking for hours. The conversation focused on President Trump's attack on Commissioner Goodell, the NFL, and many of the teams and players. And the response to that was the dominant news yesterday during football week, during the Sunday football games, as most teams either engaged in some sort of protest of the president's comment, or in a couple of cases, teams that refused to come out until the national anthem was already over. That happened with the Pittsburgh Steelers and one other team, and I'm not sure which one at this moment, but there was another team that did the same thing as well. In other words, they boycotted the national anthem because they didn't want to have to take a political position and get into anything with the President of the United States. And that got most of the attention yesterday. It's headlines in this morning's paper. It clearly is a response to the president. But my point is, more important than anything else, it diverts attention away from what looks like a looming failure on the health care front for the Republicans in the Senate. I just hope that I'm not applying what we might call, facetiously, the kiss of death. I hope I'm not burying that thing before it warrants burial. But it's looking pretty good right now, if you know what I mean. I guess I'm taking a position on it, but I don't think there's any question where I've stood on it in the past. I got into a discussion this weekend myself on this issue of protest. And it's very, very important to understand the nuances of this particular issue, like other issues. In other words, it's really important to understand the implications and ramifications of some of these happenings, some of these things that occur in our contemporary society. What I'm talking about here is the various reactions, possible reactions to this issue of the NFL protest over the national anthem. It, of course, began with Colin Kaepernick, and then it was joined in by Michael Bennett, and then a number of other players have joined in as well. But after the president popped off this weekend, the majority of the players on most teams are linking arms. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were in support of the positions that Colin Kaepernick was about when he began this initiative, this effort. It seems to me that what the NFL is concerned about is demonstrating solidarity in the face of the president's negative comments. And basically what they're saying is this president continues to divide rather than bring people together. Here in the NFL, we are together. We may be competitors on the field, but we're colleagues when it comes to some of these important issues. And I think that's important. Other people have raised the question about whether, in fact, not standing for the national anthem is a disservice to our military, is a slap in the face to our military. And you can argue that both ways. I mean, obviously, many people believe it is. But the fact of the matter is, if you take seriously the issues on which this protest has begun, you have to deal with some of the things that have been going on in the nation in recent weeks, months, and even the last couple of years. The riots in the inner city, the examples of police brutality, the number of African Americans being shot down, unarmed African American young people being shot down in our cities by the police, and whether the police are overreacting. I think all of these things are extremely important. And it stands to reason that certain people are very, very upset by it. We've had the issue of taking down the Civil War monuments, and that's really stirred an emotional reaction in the country. And so on and on and on, there seem to be one issue after the other, which are inflaming and dividing Americans in a situation, in a world in which it's becoming clear, more clear than ever, that we need to be united. And the fact of the matter is, this president is not uniting. He's dividing. He's taking positions which appeal to some people, but by definition, obviously irritate other people. And he's forcing into the day-to-day discussions, he's putting on everybody's kitchen table issues that maybe ought not to belong there. people that are good friends and think together alike on many, many issues might differ over this. And of course, the whole thrust, if that's the appropriate word, of our republic is to try to downplay or de-emphasize those divisive issues in favor of the things that people can agree on and come together on and reach compromise on. That's the basis on which this whole constitutional system was founded. That's what Madison was talking about in Federalist Number 10. And that's the issue that's being administered serious damage as we become more and more divisive, as partisanship seems to dominate our political system, our discussion on any number of issues. There's no question politically that the President of the United States is playing to his base. He is basically taking position on issues that he believed those who most actively support him would want him to take. I have seen a number of caution signs raised over this. This president, with his use of Twitter, social media, and other things, has established a body of support, a legion of support, which is huge. It doesn't involve thousands, it involves millions of people. And the polls are telling us that many of the things that seem obvious to us are getting contrary reactions from his base of support. Those who supported President Trump the most continue to support him in spite of what he does. He said that during the campaign. He predicted that. And he continually points to it as an example. And there's no question he's cultivating that base. And he's taking positions on issues that that particular constituency, in his mind, would want him to take. And in the process, he's insulting prominent people, political leaders, sports leaders, business leaders, leaders of other countries, Angela Merkel, the Prime Minister of Australia, the head man in North Korea, and on and on and on. He's coming up with very, very negative personal attacks, nicknames, for example, Little Rocket Man, and these kinds of things, which are extremely offensive and personal. And he's doing that more and more and more. But the irony is, if you think about the people that most support him, they love it. They know that it's not traditional behavior coming out of the White House. They know that this is not Donald Trump acting presidential. But their argument is, we've had enough of presidential. Look what it's done for us. Finally, we got somebody who's willing to call a spade, as it were. Somebody who's willing to say what he really believes, what many of us would say if we had the opportunity and didn't fear retribution for it. And so therefore they seem to be willing to support this president to the nth degree, so to speak. The special counsel, Robert Mueller, is in the process of collecting data and interviewing people and subpoenaing people, and seems to be headed in the direction where some sort of legal action is going to happen. Some people have honestly speculated what would happen if the evidence was there, allegations were made which were backed up by evidence, the House issued items for impeachment, there was a trial in the Senate, and the president was found guilty and asked to leave office. A, what if he wouldn't go? And B, even if he did go, what would be the reaction of those in his base? Would we be seeing protests in this country beyond anything we've ever seen? Would we be seeing violence in those protests? To what extent is the strength of the president's base the development or the design of a personal following, almost a private army of his own, as it were? These are all possibilities that serious thinking people have been raising. That's how serious this is. And so, as we talk about the protests with the national anthem, the implications of this go way beyond the issue itself. And if you believe the national anthem is an opportunity to honor our military people, and refusal to stand for it is a slap in the face to the military, it seems to me you're shrinking very broad implications down to one particular issue that seems to be the most important to you. But it may not be the most important at all. And that's really my point. One of the things that has long bothered me about the national anthem is it's become so prominent and so popular that most people don't really even appreciate what it's about, what it says. The national anthem is something that every wannabe singer has struggled to sing. Some people successfully, some people not so much. Those that know music tell me in all sincerity that that's a difficult piece for anybody to sing. And I have no reason to doubt that. But the fact of the matter is, it's there. Huge audiences are exposed to it, and a particular form of decorum has developed around it. And it's become so routine and so automatic that people have lost any appreciation for what the national anthem is all about. The president himself talks about it as honoring the nation and honoring the flag. There's no question that the national anthem honors the military aspects of America's existence or presence in the world. The national anthem was written by Francis Scott Key in a military situation, namely the bombardment in the War of 1812, in 1815, September of 1815, of Fort McHenry outside Baltimore at the head of Chesapeake Bay. And the fact that even though the bombardment of the fort was intense, the fact is that the flag still stood. And Francis Scott Key witnessed this from a ship in the harbor. And it was in that context that he put down the words that have become our national anthem. So it seems to me, in order to really get into an issue like this, you've got to think about those people that wanted this particular episode to be our national anthem. Most nations have one. What about the selection of this one as being the thing that we want citizens now and forever in the future to stand in honor of? Military power? I would suggest to you that some people want that. Many people don't.
Hey, Bill.
Yes, Bob.
Can I jump in on this for a sec?
Oh, sure.
If we're talking about taking the Star-Spangled Banner in its historical context, I think we do a disservice if we do not take the Star-Spangled Banner in its entire poetic context.
Okay, go ahead. I think I know where you're going, but go ahead.
And we have to take it in the context of its author. Poems are not written
in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Francis
right.
Scott Key was a Washington, D.C., Baltimore area lawyer.
He was a prominent supporter of slavery.
He was very much a prominent supporter of slavery. And during the War of 1812, and I know you know this, but I think it bears mentioning here so that people can add it to their understanding. During the War of 1812, the British, who had taken a dim view, or begun to take a dimmer view of slavery, actually put out a call for freed slaves to assist them.
Right, to take up arms.
Yes.
In exchange for freedom.
Exactly.
Right.
Abraham Lincoln would do the same thing during the Civil War.
Right. That's exactly right. The Massachusetts Brigade that Glory was written around.
Exactly.
Was such a group. Yeah. Right.
So
so
you get a little bit of you get a taste, more than a taste, of Francis Scott Key's native and inherent racism,
right,
in the third verse of the Star-Spangled Banner, which, of course, Donald Trump couldn't name a word of if his life depended on it.
Right. That's significant. I don't know that he even knows the first verse.
Oh, I'm pretty sure he doesn't. Remember that a guy who's railing at black athletes for not being sufficiently obsequious to a song is the same guy who stood there like a dotard. There's that word.
There it is.
While everybody around him had their hands on their hearts during the pledge, and he just stood there with his hands hanging at his side.
Yep.
Well, so here's the third verse, and it's a direct reference to that British call for slaves to take up arms.
Right.
And where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country, should leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps' pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. I think Dr. Seuss could have done it better, but that's me.
Right. Bob, you're right. I've got a copy of it in my hand, and you're exactly right. And the group, the battalion, the group of black soldiers, I think I saw a reference to them. It's called the Colonial Marines. Am I correct?
I believe you are.
I think it's called the Colonial Marines. Was a black regiment in the War of 1812 that the British were able to put together, comprised of slaves who were fighting the United States in exchange for their own freedom from slavery.
Yes.
Is what the British talked about. And that's the context in which Francis Scott Key wrote this song. And
it's pretty clear in the third verse that he doesn't just dislike them. He doesn't just disagree with them. He hates them. Right.
He wants to deport free blacks.
And then in the fourth
and not tamper with slavery.
And then in the fourth verse, he makes clear that he thinks that's what should always happen if a black man rises up in search of his own freedom.
Right.
He
Bob,
says, "Oh, thus be it ever when freemen shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation." The freeman.
Right. The freeman.
The free white man.
Right. And, the issue that I wanted to raise, Bob, and I think you gotten us into it perfectly well. Do you think that, I don't know about Colin Kaepernick personally, but do you think many of these people that refuse to stand for the national anthem are aware of this aspect of the national anthem? Do you think?
Yes, I do think.
Okay. Because that's a question I've heard raised.
And among other things, there's another angle to this, and that is that Colin Kaepernick began his protest by simply remaining seated.
Right.
And a military veteran who was also an NFL player contacted him.
Right.
And they sat down and had a chat. And he said, "I understand I understand what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to do it in a way that is respectful, take a knee."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he did thereafter.
Right.
As a way of actually showing respect for the flag, but drawing attention to the injustices that continue to be perpetrated under it.
Right. And that's the issue, I think. Because I don't know, it seems to me that when the president talks about standing for the national anthem as being an honor to the country, an honor to the flag, then ultimately you get to the issue of what's happening with non-whites in this two non-whites in this country, and whether in fact this isn't the time you want to express that honor until the nation lives up to its own standards, its own creed, if you will. And so you got that issue. Then you've got the historical context of the national anthem itself. And it seems to me you got a number of nuances here, which I think it's important to know. But on the other hand, I also recognize that a lot of people can't know them and don't know them on both sides of the aisle, it would seem to me.
Yes, and there is in fact a fifth stanza, and this is particularly interesting because it stands as a stark counterpoint to Francis Scott Key's racism. It was written by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. during the Civil War, at the beginning, and of course
I didn't know this one, Bob.
And Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr.'s son, of course, would go to that Civil War, and I believe be wounded.
Uh-huh.
And of course, he's a Massachusetts Brahmin.
Mm-hmm.
But he was also when Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. had a broad patriotic streak. He's the man who single-handedly, among other things, he's the man who single-handedly saved the USS Constitution from being scrapped.
Mm-hmm.
By writing a poem about scrapping the USS Constitution.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But at the outset of the Civil War, he added a fifth verse. And apparently that fifth verse was also included as part of the Star-Spangled Banner in the songbooks of that time period. And it reads, and I have not seen mention in social media of this, and maybe it should be, "When our land is illumined with liberty's smile, if a foe from within strike a blow at her glory, down, down with the traitor that dares to defile the flag of her stars and the page of her story. By the millions unchained who our birthright have gained, we will keep her bright blazon forever unstained, and the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave, while the land of the free is the home of the brave."
Wow.
And that gives that gives me chills to read.
Yeah, it does me
because he straight up calls the South in that traitors.
Right.
And the people,
he's talking about those internally that violate what this nation stands for.
And the people who were marching up and down demanding that statues of a man who committed treason, Robert E. Lee, and the other Confederates, the people who were marching around and waving guns and actually killed a person, demanding that those monuments be preserved, are now the same people who are claiming the flag of the United States as their own.
Right.
And there's a certain symbolism in that.
Wow.
And that is of a Confederacy resurgent. In fact, a Confederacy triumphant.
Triumphant. That is astounding. I wasn't familiar with that fifth verse, Bob. I really wasn't. I don't think I ever heard that. That's powerful. My God. So that's a counter to the entire anthem.
Yes.
Wow. That I didn't know. I appreciate you telling me that.
That's an abolitionist's answer to the third stanza.
Right. Exactly. Oh, it's wonderful. I didn't know that part of the story. I'm so glad you got on, Bob, because I didn't know that. That's wonderful. I want to get a copy of that baby, because that is absolutely. I just didn't know there was a fifth stanza.
Well, the thing that I wonder about is, since it was published as a fifth stanza, when did it disappear?
Where did it go? And that's the whole point. And that goes back to the original issue here, is who are the people who made the decision that this particular song should be our national anthem? Nations have them. Who decided this ought to be ours? When there's so many other options and directions you could go about this, what this nation ought most to stand for. Why is it military power that suddenly is the issue here?
Well, a lot of, there was a movement at one point in time to replace it with America the Beautiful.
Right.
Which would be fine by me.
Me too.
Of course, given my politics, I think the national anthem should be "This Land Is Your Land."
Right. Yeah,
But then there's one other thing that goes with this, and it has a little bit to do with our tendency to think to view ourselves as the center of the universe, and that is, at most sporting events the world over, and we're not the only country that packs people into stadiums to watch sporting events.
Mm-hmm.
There is not a period of rampant nationalism that begins every game.
Every event. Yeah.
And in point of fact, some teams stayed in the locker room yesterday.
Right.
And you know what? That's what they always used to do.
Right.
They did not come out until after the pregame festivities were over.
And suddenly it's become a hot item, a political item. And I know the coach of Pittsburgh said basically he didn't want his team caught up in that mess. They were together, and he wanted to keep them together, and the way to do it is to keep them down there and not even expose them to this. And it's incredible. The other thing that I was thinking of, Bob, is that people who know music talk about what a bad piece of music this is.
It's terrible.
It's awful.
It's a drinking song.
What the hell is there to it that makes it what it is? Unless there's a political message here from the people most responsible for touting this thing as our national anthem,
or for American militarism.
Right. Exactly.
The Battle Hymn of the Republic, got tremendous play once it was written during the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And was probably played more. I'm guessing here. I have no data on this whatsoever. Yeah. It was probably, once it was published, it was probably played more than the national anthem was on the northern side of the Civil War.
Right.
And God knows, the Southerners didn't appropriate the national anthem for themselves. They were playing Dixie.
Right.
In a way, it's almost it reminds me of what you taught us about the fact that the Declaration of Independence had slid into almost obscurity before it was resurrected by Abraham Lincoln.
By Abraham Lincoln.
Somebody, as you rightly point out, somebody had an agenda.
Yeah. That's what this is. It goes back to this idea of the history we read. What we read is really what we want to find. And basically it speaks to the fact that certain people have an inordinate influence over what our history books tell us. And that's really been true throughout. And I think it would be really interesting to go back and trace and do research on the historical ordinances of the movement that made this the national anthem.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have any of that. I don't have any of that knowledge myself. But it's a question that it seems to me ought to be asked, and the incentive for it are the people who are so adamant that citizens ought to forfeit their rights and stand up and appear to be honoring it, even if they're not. I mean, that goes back to the whole idea of the Pledge of Allegiance and whether children ought to be required to do it in school and all of it. I mean, all of these things. It's really significant. Powerful people have been responsible for making a lot of these decisions. I think on our history, what the story in our history books is. In our second hour today, Bob, I plan to go into a little bit of this because I've seen it firsthand over the last week in papers I've been grading. I want to share. I think there's a message.
Well, with that being the case, should we take the top of the hour break?
Yeah, maybe we should. God, it is the top of the hour already. I didn't realize. Bob, thank you, my friend. My God, that was great.
Well,
thank you.
I appreciate you letting me kibitz.
I really loved it. Thank you. I enjoyed it. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution. We've gone beyond the top of the hour by a minute or two, but we're going to pause, take a 5-minute break, then we'll be back with our second hour here at the Virtual Center on this Monday, the 25th day of September. I hope you'll stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Thank you.
We now return to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Here again is Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a second hour here at the Virtual Center on this Monday. It is the 25th day of September in the year 2017. If you are just joining us, it is a pleasure to ask you to be with us again. We appreciate it. If you've been with us through the first hour, then you were privy to one heck of a conversation. And again, I have to thank Bob Kincaid for that. We were talking about the protests of the national anthem and the president's role in it, and talking about the historical context within which Francis Scott Key wrote the document. Bob introduced us to a fifth stanza, which was written by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., that I didn't know about, and I'm just thrilled to have learned that today. And that's the way you learn, it seems to me, is interaction. That's why we so encourage folks to share their thoughts with us. You can do that by going through Skype, Bob Kincaid at Skype, and Bob can get you on the air. If you'd like to send me an email and put your thoughts in an email, I'll do the very best I can to represent you here on the air by sharing your thoughts and your ideas with our listeners, because we really want to get your contribution out there, however is the most convenient for you. But the fact of the matter is, the entire operation itself will be benefited once we get your thoughts out there for others to appreciate. That's the way we all learn, is that kind of interaction, that kind of dialogue. If you'd like to go to our Facebook page, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Facebook page in a minute as far as it relates to the class that I'm teaching. I invite you to do that. If you are a regular user of Facebook, you know how easy it is. Just go to facebook.com, and that's the home page. And on the home page, you'll see a search box at the top. And if you type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will be onto our Facebook page, and you will be privy to some of the latest editions or postings on that Facebook page. And as I said at the very beginning of our first hour, most of what's on there has been related directly to the class I'm teaching, because to be honest with you, it's a pretty intense piece of work that I've taken on myself. The irony of this is, and I think I don't know, I've mentioned this to a couple of people, and they said it's a positive rather than a negative. But the fact that I've taught this course as many times as I've have over the years, probably 35 to 40 times, and along with the research I'm doing, and this is the area I've been doing most of it, the area of the founding, Constitution, Declaration, early years of the Republic, etc. When you combine that with the number of years I've taught this course and specialization courses within it, a number of people that I've mentioned about the workload are impressed that there is a workload, and their point is most people that have taught it this way would just go in and wing it based on what they did before. And I just can't do that. It seems to me a disservice, because while there have been a lot of people in past years who've been through these classes and have put up with me and hopefully learned a few things in the process, these students aren't among them. And so my responsibilities, while they may appear to be to the institution, to the class, to the discipline, to the subject itself, my principal responsibilities are to this particular group of students. And anything less than what I'm capable of doing, I would feel would be shorting them, and I just can't do that. I won't do it. So consequently, the workload is pretty intense, especially when you consider the fact that there are 85 names on my roll. There are 5 or 6 of them that have stopped coming or never came or those kinds of things. So I'm probably dealing with something in the mid to upper 70s in terms of people that are actually taking the class. I haven't counted. I recorded the exams, midterm exams last night, and I think I only had 3 people that missed them, and most of these 3 people are out of town because they're on some athletic team for the institution, and I had to reschedule their exam, and it'll be Thursday. But except for those 3, I think I got everybody else. So if I can count them up, I can pretty well determine how many people are actually in the class. But it's a substantial number. For those of you who missed it in our first hour, Bob joined us. We were talking about the protests to the national anthem and the historical origins of Francis Scott Key and what he was doing when he wrote it, and a little bit, Bob shared a little bit of Francis Scott Key's own background, his own life with us. And the point is that Francis Scott Key's racism, I guess we would accurately call it, very pro-slavery, and really convinced that genetically African Americans non-whites were inferior intellectually and culturally and other ways. And so his real positions were to encourage, which Lincoln was trying to do, encourage free blacks to migrate somewhere else in order to avoid any kind of racial issue here in the country. And given the numbers of slaves in this country, Key's position was the best thing we can do is support the institution, because the institution gives us a way to control the potentially hostile population that we've brought into this country through the slave trade and the institution itself and all the rest of it. And then Bob shared with us some of the following stanzas. Everybody's familiar with the first stanza. That's what people sing as the national anthem. But the fact of the matter is, if you read the rest of it, you can begin to see that some of Francis Scott Key's racial prejudices and priorities come out in later verses, the third verse especially, of the song. There are a number of articles you can pick up on Google. If you Google the Star-Spangled Banner, you'll see a number of articles directly related to the racial overtones, the racial substance ingrained in the national anthem, in the Star-Spangled Banner. Bob was able to introduce a 5th stanza, which was written by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. I honestly did not know that this existed. And it was a stanza added that challenged what Francis Scott Key wrote and challenge the racism of what Francis Scott Key wrote. And so the question that Bob and I were raising in our discussion is, what happened to that fifth stanza? Where did it go? It's understandable that most people would only be familiar with the first stanza because that's what everybody sings. But I think most people know that there is more than one stanza, although they never bother to look at it. But I didn't know that there was a fifth one, and I really appreciate learning that. And it's quite powerful because it really is an antidote to the rest of the song. And we talked about the fact that, given the fact that people who know music acknowledge that the national anthem is a terrible piece of music, people who sing talk about how difficult it is to sing. Then one has to wonder, how did it become our national anthem? Who's responsible for that? How did it happen? And when you look at the militaristic aspects of the national anthem, the fact that this is our national anthem is a significant point in the history of our country. I don't know that anybody's ever done that research. I don't know. I know I haven't. But I think it's very, very significant. And that was the issue. That was what we were talking about in our first hour. I thought it was an absolutely incredibly informative conversation, and I want to thank Bob for that. I kind of have this. I was thinking during the break that I'm guessing that Bob's probably going to go into some of that on his program this evening, because he seemed pretty much up on it, and that, of course, that's what's Bob doing, is preparing all the time for this program, which is on 3 hours a night every night for 5 nights a week. It's an incredible schedule, it seems to me. But I think part of the reason it works for Bob is because of the core of listeners that he can depend on, that he's got. Not only do they support the network financially, but also psychologically, personally, and participant-wise, and every other way as well. So I think that's a wonderful thing. I mentioned that in this hour I'd like to get into a few things related to the course that I'm teaching. I need to be very careful because I don't want to do it in any kind of a way that implies that I'm at all disparaging students, because I'm not. But I think it's interesting because this particular exam that I just finished grading was the first exam in the course. And it was a discussion type of exam. And most of these students who are in college, I think probably more than half of the class, are beginning students. These are first-year students for the most part, I think. Although with 85 of them, it's hard to tell. You don't know them well enough to really know. But most of them, it's clear, have never taken an exam like this, have never prepared for an exam like this, really aren't at all familiar with the skills necessary to prepare material for such an exam. I expected that. And what I told students at the very beginning was that my goal is to teach you how to do this. And I didn't mean to necessarily attack the value of education, but I had to point out that a significant amount of this is a game. What I mean is, being successful in college is a skill. It's a learnable skill. It's a transferable skill. Parents can pass it on to their children, children to their children, to grandchildren, neighbors, friends, etc. One of the things I've found in the years that I've been teaching here in West Virginia is that the reason West Virginia higher education and West Virginia students have such a difficult time at the college level is because there aren't that many people in West Virginia proportionately who know how to play the game, who have the skills. Most of them come from backgrounds where they tend to be the first in their family to ever go to college. So they don't have the role models at home. They don't have the people at home to show them or explain to them how to do it. And what distinguishes our colleges and universities from others in other states that I've taught, visited and taught for, is that other states seem to feature proportionately greater numbers of people that know how the game is played. They come in with many of the skills they needed. They're able to do a lot of the things that our students have never been taught. And the fact of the matter is, and this is the most disturbing part, too many instructors that I know have become gun shy because of this. And their rationale is, maybe I should change my way of teaching and not demand those skills, since so few of my students are going to have them. And they usually don't take it upon themselves to teach those skills. They usually grade people on whether people are able to do this or not. And that dooms a lot of these people to an unsuccessful experience after high school at the college level. Basically, West Virginia has proportionately more adults who come from a very negative higher education experience, I'm guessing, than any other state in the union. West Virginia youngsters, by definition, tend to be woefully unprepared. It's not that they aren't capable. It's not that they're not intelligent enough. And that's the problem. West Virginia has been labeled, all of these negative labels that suggest that there's something innate about this state that means that our educational system somehow is at a tier or a level below most others. It's the skills, it's the how to do this stuff that our students need to know. So I expected on the first exam that a number of students would really flounder because they really wouldn't know how to do this. And before the exam, and we know that you tell these things ahead of time, but until you actually do it, or until you are actually asked to do it, it's just rhetoric. None of it has any meaning or any substantive message to it. But before this exam, I made it very clear. And in the course outline itself, I told students that I was going to do this. And that one of the objectives for this course is that by the end of the semester, most of these students would know how to do it. Now, I'm not saying that they'd all be doing it well, because some people are going to pick it up quickly. Others, it's going to take a while. But everybody, it seems to me, has a right to fail, has a right to at least be given the chance to be successful. Whether they are or not is pretty much up to them. But it ought not to be because I haven't given them the skills, I haven't shown them how to do it. And so I expected that a significant number of students would have trouble. And of course, and it proved to be true. I wasn't at all surprised. So what I have to do as the instructor is I have to stagger the grades. I have to set up a grading system that allows for this, that anticipates it and allows for it. I can't set up a grading system which is going to put people in a position where they can't possibly pass the course when only a third of it has been completed so far. I have a responsibility to structure the grading system in such a way that as students begin to pick up the skills and perform better, the grading system gives them an opportunity to be rewarded for this. So that at the end of the class, at the end of the semester, during what we usually refer to as the final exam, for most students, that's going to be the final opportunity in this course for people to show what they've learned. And I've got to structure the grades in such a way that it it overwhelms the negative grades they may have gotten earlier. So the way I set the course up is my final exam counts double every other exam. And then I'm giving another exam in 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. That will be optional. So my 2 exams are going to be midterm and final. But in between, I'm going to have 2 take-home papers, assignments, like the one the students did on John Winthrop's speech a couple of weeks ago. But the point is, with a second exam in class that is optional, a second paper on a document, and a final exam that counts double, what that means is no student, no matter what grade they got on this exam, is out of the ballpark, is out of the running to get a good grade in this course. Obviously, the final grade is going to be pretty much determined by how quickly the people that pick it up fastest are going to be rewarded most. I can't really change that. But at some point in time, it seems to me everybody has the opportunity to be able to do this. And once they begin to do it, they have developed the opportunity to self-educate themselves. Once you begin to understand what the system demands of you and are able to deliver it, then your potential is limited only by what your potential is. You're in control. You have been empowered, as it were. And that's really what we're talking about. But let me share something else with you that I learned. Maybe I'm overly observant. But one of the things I was very interested this time around, knowing full well that a lot of students wouldn't know how to answer these questions or wouldn't know what to put in them or what's being asked for, that students would be in a situation where they felt like they had to write something, so they would wing it. They would be writing on things they didn't know, and much of what they were saying would be bullshit, honestly. But I can't say that. I can't write that on the papers and tell a student this is bullshit. You know it. I know it. But the fact of the matter is, we do both know it. And we know that if a student doesn't have any idea what he or she is talking about and ends up writing a full page on it, then basically what you can expect is there's nothing substantive in it. It's just meaningless statements and a collection of words that don't say anything. So in my comments, I find myself regularly making comments like, what does this mean? What are you talking about? Do you understand the implications of what you're saying, etc.? Let me give you one example from one of the questions. This we covered in class. So for those students that were in class, this ought to be a gimme. What I did was quote Thomas Jefferson, "Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is a quotation from the Virginia Declaration of Rights, passed 1 month prior to the Declaration of Independence. In the state of Virginia, primarily under the pen of George Mason, the Virginia legislature adopted what is called the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Jefferson was significantly involved in the development of that document. So what we've got is somewhat of a contradiction. What I mean by that is Jefferson was involved in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was adopted in June 1776. And in that Declaration of Rights, the equivalent section to the Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness section in the Declaration of Independence says this: the enjoyment of life and liberty with the means of acquiring and possessing property and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. Let me repeat this. The enjoyment of life and liberty with the means of acquiring and possessing property and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. Unquote. So the question I asked, was that quote beside Jefferson's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness quote in the Declaration? And what I asked him to do was to compare and contrast the two terms and to address the difference between them. What are the differences? Are there any? And what we talked about in class was the fact that traditionally many historians have concluded that there really isn't much difference, that they both say the same thing. Jefferson just says it in fewer words. And what they have to confront, of course, is that in the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson says nothing about property. Instead of property, what John Locke called in the 17th century, life, liberty, and property in the state of nature, Jefferson talked about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He didn't mention property in the Declaration of Independence. The question is it significant? Is that significant? Many historians have said no. Many historians have said that's really what Jefferson meant by happiness, was property. The only difference is he couldn't say property and expect the Declaration to be adopted. He was facing a political challenge. And in order to successfully meet that challenge, he had to play it carefully. And the thinking was that if he had mentioned property, it would have sent the message to a lot of people that the struggle for independence was really about protecting the properties of the wealthy. And Jefferson didn't want to go there. And so the thinking is that by replacing property with pursuit of happiness, Jefferson was able to say the same thing without the political risks. Carl Becker, in his book on the Declaration of Independence in 1922, says that very, very explicitly. Jefferson's Declaration was directly descended from Locke's second treatise on civil government. Jefferson took the language from Locke. He took the ideas and the philosophy of Locke. He adopted the ideology of Locke. And just as Locke respected the value of private property, so also did Jefferson. He just couldn't say it and expect to get the Declaration ratified. Carl Becker's treatment of the Declaration of Independence has become gospel among historians. That's what's in all the textbooks. That's what the people who publish the textbooks want our young people to believe and know about the Declaration of Independence. But the historical reality is that there's a challenge, there's a problem here. Because 3 weeks before he wrote the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson participated in a document, the Virginia Declaration of Rights, in which happiness and property were addressed separately. The implication being that happiness meant more to Jefferson and to the people who wrote the Virginia Declaration. Happiness didn't mean property. They mentioned that specifically by itself. The means of possessing and acquiring property. Let me be accurate here. The enjoyment of life and liberty with the means of acquiring and possessing property. Opportunity, freedom. The freedom to pursue property and the right to own it if the opportunity presented itself, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. The implication here is that property and happiness actually might have separate meanings. Happiness has its own meaning. And here at the Virtual Center, we've done some investigation and pulled together some resources over the months which indicate that many philosophers, many of the Enlightenment philosophers of the 18th century, defined happiness in a very specific way, which focus on the benefits of making other people happy, of having the resources necessary to bring happiness and joy to other people. If that's true, and if Jefferson was fully aware of this, which of course he was, then one has to at least consider the possibility that Jefferson's omission of property in the Declaration of Independence and his use of happiness instead is significant. That's the controversy. That's the issue. And my feeling in this course was I wanted students to know that that controversy existed and continues to exist. And historians disagree about it. One of the things I did was put on for students a letter that Jefferson wrote in which Jefferson explained that in 1770 his mother's house burned down and all of his books and all of his notes were lost, which means everything that Jefferson studied as a student at William and Mary, as well as in the years before he got to William and Mary, are lost. We don't know what Jefferson's notes said. We don't know what books Jefferson had on his library shelf that were lost in that fire. What we do know is that Jefferson was distraught that all of his books and all of his notes were gone. That means that in order to really understand Jefferson, we have nothing to go on by everything that, except to look at everything he did, everything he wrote after 1770. And we have to assume that the positions he took and the issues he wrote about are the things that were in his notes, in his college courses, et cetera, et cetera. We can assume that, but we don't know for absolute fact that it's true. But if it is, then Jefferson's use of the word happiness in the Declaration of Independence has been taken from him and has been replaced with property, which certain people have been able to use their positions and their influence to implement and to sell as if this was what Thomas Jefferson believed. What we could be seeing here is the hijacking of Thomas Jefferson in order to complement the redefinition of Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence to suit the political priorities of the people with influence and prestige enough to be able to pull this off. It's the same kind of problem that we talked about in our first hour today about the fifth stanza to the national anthem, to the Star-Spangled Banner. What happened to the stanza that Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. wrote? When did it disappear? How did it disappear? Who caused it to disappear? That could be the same thing we're looking at with the Declaration of Independence itself. That was the discussion in class that we had. So I felt very comfortable putting that question on the exam. Obviously, people that weren't there for the discussion that day should not have taken that question. But if they weren't that comfortable with the other things on the exam and they had to pick something to guess at, they might as well pick that one, because everybody can figure out what life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness might mean. So what I'm suggesting here, and I know we don't have time to do this, maybe we ought to revisit it in another program, because I think the more I get into this, the more I think this may be more significant than the right answers. The wrong answers may be more informative. What I saw in this exam were a number of students who didn't know what was expected, so they felt that what they had to do was wing it. BS, whatever it is. So they wrote line after line, sentence after sentence of nothing. But what I'm suggesting is the substance of that nothing is significant. The successes, in quotes, of our educational system surface in these essays about nothing, written by students who don't know nothing about the particular question they're responsible for answering. And so when you give them a question like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and they really don't know what it refers to contextually, then they start to talk about what life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness means to them. And you get line after line, paragraph after paragraph, about the American dream of a job with a living wage, retirement, owning your own home, a wife with children, a dog. In other words, the American dream is what happiness is about. And in order to do that, you got to be free. You got to be able to enjoy your freedom. You got to be healthy. You can't do any of this if your health is no good. So ultimately, what you get is a lot of rhetoric about nothing as far as the course is concerned, but very revealing rhetoric in terms of what these people think they ought to say and what they believe they ought to make it clear that they subscribe to and do believe. In other words, one of the things that became very clear to me, for the most part, in the essays that constituted BS on this exam were that the vast majority of people in this class, at least at this point, stand for the national anthem. Not only that, but they would look down on those people who didn't. They would fall into the category, at least in this area, of showing the makings of becoming potential Trumpsters who have embedded, who have absorbed what it is they're supposed to know and believe, and whenever put in a situation where they know that they don't know what it is that they're being asked, so they tout the truths that they've been taught. And so in reality, what they say is as much as revealing, if not more revealing, than the people who know what the question is referring to and address it. I think that's quite significant. That's just that one question. Let me share. I'm not going to share with you the entire exam. We don't have time, and I don't know whether it would be valuable use of that time anyway. 10 days before the exam. No, not 10 days, probably about a week. I put together a list of 20 pairs of terms. That one being Jefferson's pursuit of happiness phrase from the Declaration of Independence as contrasted with the appropriate phrase from the Virginia Declaration of Rights. That was one of 20 such pairs that I put together. And these pairs were selected from the material from the content in the first unit of the class. And I felt that they were representative samplings of some of the major issues and concepts that we had been covering through the first 4 weeks of the course. So I gave them these 20 pairs. And what I told them was that the reason I got them paired up with the other one is because I'm assuming going in that there's a connection or a relationship between the parts of each pair. So what I told them is, on exam day, I'm going to make you write on 5 of these pairs. Here are 20 of them. You have a week to prepare. When you come in on exam day, I'm going to ask you to write on 5 that I select from these 20. I expect that you would be able to write on all 20. But I'm only going to ask you to do 5. Not only that, but I'm going to give you a choice. I'm going to give you 7 of the 20 and ask you to pick 5. Which means excuse me for the phone in the background. What that basically meant was that there ought not to be a situation when students are writing about things they don't know. With this kind of warning and this kind of specificity and this kind of choice, chances are that the questions that students will be writing on will be questions that they really ought to know something about. Then by giving you a choice of 5 out of 7, I'm saying strike the 2 you know least about and pick the 5 you know the best. My grading then, when I grade, I'm going to be grading on the basis that this is the stuff that you know better than anything else I might have asked. So basically it's up to you to prove that by what you write. Some of the pairs of terms I gave. The creation and preservation of community, as opposed to something called the stake in society principle. We've talked about that here. The idea of skin in the game or vested interest. The requirements for voting and office holding, property requirements, and why they're there and what the implication, what they mean, what they signify. The rise of the middle class and the emergence of nation states in Western Europe. The transition from the medieval period to the modern period, the emergence of capitalism, the rise of a middle class, of a business community, and the degree to which a positive relationship between this business community and the emerging governments that were happening at the time was significant. That's one of the other pairs that I gave. The issue of pluralism or diversity in society and the idea of separation of church and state. The issue of home rule versus who should rule at home. That's Carl Becker's dissertation, PhD dissertation, on the American Revolution in New York. Becker made the point that while we in our textbooks focus principally on the American colonies and the problems the colonies were having with England, the fact of the matter is, at the same time, there was another kind of revolution happening within every one of the colonies. Challenges to the existent power structure, the existent elite in the various colonies. And Becker made the point that when you get into this, it's probably true to say that the internal revolution within colonies was actually probably more important than the struggle between colonies and Mother England. That was one of the terms we used. The indentured servant system and the headright system, using land and the opportunities for labor in order to populate the colonies and provide a labor force in colonial America. Why England would want it, the fact that you're using land and you're making 50-acre plots of land available for every person you are responsible for bringing over to the New World. The result of this headright system is the creation of a landed aristocracy, the creation of large landed estates in the hands of few families proportionally, and what that ultimately means to the development of the nation. The issues of conservative and radicals at the time of the American Revolution. I had made the point in class that you would naturally guess that conservatives would be opposed to independence, radicals would be for it. The fact of the matter is the definitions are much more complicated than that. But basically, that was the exam I gave. And as I mentioned, a significant number of students were left helpless in this. They really didn't know how to prepare for it. They really didn't know what to say. And in some cases, because they didn't know what to say, they included an awful lot of what they believe. The result was that these exams became informative in their own right. They say an awful lot about our education system, especially at the secondary school level, in middle school and high school. This is what we're turning out. And I think it's very revealing and very significant. I don't think it's out of place to say we better start thinking about ways to do something about it, because it's extremely counterproductive and extremely dangerous. What it's producing are robot-like people who are memorizing and absorbing what it is their told truth is. And they are being denied the kinds of challenging critical skills necessary to challenge or to question what they're being asked to absorb. No wonder we're having problems competing in the modern world. No wonder, with the exception of the very bright people from the best families who have the role models at home, who can afford the tutoring and the special helps necessary to be successful in college and in high school. With the exception of those, the challenges of today's modern technological world leave many of these people helpless. They're unable to function. They're unable to find a place. They're unable to figure out how to bring anything that's worth value to the marketplace or to the workplace. And so what we have is an economic system driven by technology, increasingly dominated by the internet, that is demanding skills that our people don't have, with the exception of a few, and we're not doing anything to teach those skills. And we darn well better start, and soon. Because until we do, we're performing a tremendous disservice to our young people. I really debated whether, in fact, to take time here at the Virtual Center, get into this issue. But I couldn't resist it because I really do believe it's significant. And I very honestly feel for these people that I'm asking to do things that they don't understand. On the surface, they do. What I'm asking them to do sounds easy until you do it. But when they try to do it, they realize that they can't do it. Nobody ever showed them how. They haven't really put together an argument, a solid argument. They've never had to take a position and argue for it. They've never had to pull research data together in order to back up a point of view or to challenge a competing point of view. They've never been confronted with a situation with two things that are connected with each other and focusing on the things that connect them rather than the things themselves. Many students are very adept at explaining exactly what a particular item is or what a particular term means. But when you have to take that and relate it to another one, they really don't know how to do that. The only way to do it is to do it. And what I mean is, we've got to show them. And we can't continue to penalize them for not knowing. And rewarding only the people who do know. For an individual, that's devastating. For society, it's even more so. We're losing some of our potentially best people. We're sabotaging, we're scuttling some of our potentially best talent. We're depriving them of the opportunity to demonstrate what they know because we haven't shown them how to demonstrate it, how to make it clear, how to implement it, how to actually do it. And I think that's what we're about. I don't think it's a waste of time at all. That's why I feel like spending such time on a set of exams like this is worth it. I can't, in good conscience, pass up the possibility of giving them the opportunity to learn these things while I have the opportunity to teach them. The mere fact that they put 80 people in the class makes it difficult, but you have to continue to try because that's really what it seems to me quality education is about. We've kind of reached the end of our program today. We're just about a minute before the top of the hour. Let me first of all thank you for once again tuning in and giving us a couple of your valuable hours of your time for this program. I hope that you found it worth the investment of time that it required. For those of you who were with us in the first hour, when Bob joined us for the last 20 minutes of the hour, I think it was an exhilarating experience. I hope you agree. This last hour, I'm sharing my experience with you because I believe that I'm learning some things. I don't necessarily like all the things I'm learning, but I'm learning them nonetheless, and I want to share them with you. More importantly, I want to give you the opportunity to react to them. And again, please feel free to react, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's calling the program on a future program, or whatever. Again, let me remind you, we will not be doing a live program tomorrow. I'll be in Richmond, Virginia, but I will be back on Wednesday. For Bob Kincaid, Agnes, and the folks at the Head On Radio Network, and for me, Bill O'Brien, here at the Virtual Center, let me thank you for your continued support of the Head On Network and of this program. I hope you have a wonderful evening, a wonderful day tomorrow. I won't be with you live tomorrow, but I'll be back on Wednesday. Be kind to each other, be safe, and thank you.